The Power of Ayn Rand, a talk with philosopher Francisco Villalobos. What's up, folks? This is Justin Garcia, a.k.a. Master Chim, and I'm here with the cracker-ass cracker, White Boy Pat.
What's up?
And welcome to another episode of The Pressure Project. ThePressureProject.com is our website. Info at ThePressureProject.com is our contact email. YouTube.com/ThePressureProject is our YouTube channel. For those of you that are watching this on YouTube or those of you that are listening and are going to hit YouTube up later, subscribe to our channel, please. We are trying to sort of gather the army of the power players, and we could definitely use your participation in that.
100%.
So today I have a talk with a longtime friend of mine, Francisco Villalobos, and Francisco is one of the smartest people I know. And I've known him maybe 15 years. And I don't want to give away too much of the story because we talk about it, at length in the interview. Yes. But great guy, great conversations. And, he's somebody before, I had the Pressure Project. He and I meet every so often. And we meet for lunch. And, we usually have just these incredible conversations about powerful topics. And, he's somebody who I definitely sort of enjoy the fact that he knows so many things about so many things.
Yes.
And he serves as a sounding board, a guide, a mentor. He helps me flesh out my own ideas by asking, great questions. And, he's really been integral in my development as a confident philosopher myself. And at least developing, my own philosophy, the philosophy that I'm constantly, sharing and trying to grow with the Pressure Project. So we won't hold you too much longer. The interview is how long, Pat?
It's 90 minutes.
About 90 minutes. It's a great talk. Francisco, great dude. So check out the interview. Enjoy, and we will see you on the other side. The Power of Ayn Rand, a talk with Francisco Villalobos. What's up, folks? This is Justin Garcia, a.k.a. Master Chim, and I'm here in studio with a guest, good friend of mine, Francisco Villalobos. Francisco, do me a favor. Say hello to the listeners.
Hi, listeners.
All right, so you guys don't know who Francisco is. Francisco has been a friend of mine probably 15 years at this point.
Yeah.
Little bit of trivia, and you and I have discussed this, over the years. Francisco was the first guy to ever kick my ass in MMA class. I remember you were getting ready for a fight. Yeah. I was training maybe 6 months, and I had a wrestling background, so I was one of the I guess very generically tougher guys in the room. Certainly not technical at the time, but tough. And you needed training partners, and they asked me if I would, would you help Francisco out? Yeah, sure, no problem. And I remember sizing you up and going, fuck, he's tall. So how tall are you? About
6'2".
So about 6'2", and I'm 5'5". So I'm like, all right, big dude. All right. And, I'm still looking at it from a very competitive standpoint, not having trained at any great length of time. And you were beating the crap out of me. But the whole time asking me if I was okay. So I didn't know which was worse. The fact that you were beating the shit out of me or that you were constantly asking me if I was all right. It's like, just knock me out already so I can stop.
Rub it in.
Yeah.
Rub it in.
But completely sincere you were. Yeah. But that was my first introduction to who you were. Yeah. But for those of, those guys that are listening, give them your background. Give them, I have you talking about generically, Ayn Rand and her philosophies, and I'm sure we'll touch on other things as we move along. But let them know, what is your background? Who are you to be talking about anything in terms of philosophy? And don't undersell yourself because I'll shout you out.
All right. Well,
show off.
I took an interest in philosophy when I was in middle school. And I think one of the first philosophers that I actually read was Nietzsche, who's a personal favorite of yours. Yes. Beyond Good and Evil, Genealogy of Morals. And I liked him a lot. There was there's a poet in him that speaks to me, and he speaks a lot to the higher aspects of what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a man. And that spoke to me a lot as a young man. Then that, I think his birth of tragedy led me to read some of the ancient Greeks, that introduced me to Aristotle, Plato, Socrates. And at that point, I was talking so much about philosophy that my teachers noticed. And early in high school, I had a teacher come to me and say, you know, people get paid to talk about that stuff. There's a profession. You're a professor, and you talk about philosophy, any topic, and you write about it, and you teach about it, give lectures. And I said, really? There's someone would actually pay me?
This was Bronx
High School of Science, yes. Right. I had originally come from a military school, Eastern Military Academy, which was in Huntington, New York. It's now Oheka Castle, a place for business meetings and marriages. And then I went to Catholic school for a few years, which was a terrible fit for me because I got punished a lot for some of the things that I would just simply ask.
Right.
So then I went to Bronx High School of Science, and that was a much better fit. And around a lot of other really bright kids. And I had tremendous interest in biology at the time. I thought maybe I'd go into neuroscience or something like that, or perhaps psychiatry. And then this teacher introduced me to the idea of being a professor of philosophy. I said, my goodness, I would do this for free.
Right.
So this whole idea of having a profession that I would normally do for free, but I'm going to get paid to do it, seemed ideal to me.
Well, that's the name of the game, isn't it? Right.
Yeah, ideally. If you can find that fit,
right.
It's great. I find some people find their passion in reverse, where they'll go into a profession and they see they become good at it, and that lends itself to their loving it.
Right.
And they feel a sense of camaraderie with people perhaps on their team, and they move up rapidly and they come to love it. Whereas I pursued a love independent of knowing what it would actually be like to teach. And so I graduated high school. I went to UC Berkeley. I wanted to break away from being in New York and go someplace different, to open my mind, to open my self to new experiences.
Now, I will say,
yes,
people are going to hear UC Berkeley,
yes,
and they're going to turn off the podcast. No, just
yeah.
wait.
Yes.
How he wound up in UC Berkeley,
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
But so reserve any judgment.
Well, I'll tell you. I'll tell you. I mean, UC Berkeley, I think at the time was ranked number 6 or 7 in terms of philosophy departments in the country. And so for me, it was a choice between Stanford and Berkeley. Berkeley was a lot less expensive. It was a lot more accessible to San Francisco and to nightlife and to an experience outside of an enclave like Palo Alto. So I wanted that. I wanted to not only learn in school, but learn by interacting with a lot of different, interesting people from different walks of life, much like I had done growing up in New York City. So Berkeley was a much more urbane type of setting for me, and that appealed to me. And it was a great department. I knew that it was very left-leaning. I knew that it was the place where you had the free speech movement and a lot of the riots from the 60s when Reagan was governor of California. But that didn't deter me. I mean, I had always, from a very young age, been very independent-minded, almost to the annoyance of my parents. As I was always asking why and what for and questioning things. And
so it didn't matter what everyone else on the campus was doing or thinking.
Yeah, I knew that many of the professors might have an agenda politically, but I thought, well, I'll hear what they have to say and I'll make up my own mind. I'd rarely read a book or talked to someone where every syllable that came out of their mouth was something that I agreed with. So I'd always followed the policy of, well, I'll take the best of what I hear or read from anywhere, and I'll make it my own, and I'll incorporate it into my own approach to things, my own way of thinking about things. And that's exactly what I did at Berkeley. So I did 5 years at Berkeley, where I majored in philosophy and rhetoric, because I wanted to actually be an effective teacher. I wanted to be an effective communicator. And one of the things that I found was that as an undergrad or even later on as I went to my graduate studies in philosophy, there aren't any courses, there aren't any books that prepare you to become a great teacher. I think the predominant slant is to prepare you to be a good writer of philosophy, to be a good researcher, but not to be a good communicator of the ideas, and not take into account the needs of the audience at all times. And that's challenging, even in the best of situations, like when you have the huge lecture courses, Philosophy 101, with hundreds of students.
Right.
So I graduated Berkeley with those 2 BAs, one in rhetoric and one in philosophy. And now, at that point, I knew I wanted to focus on ethical and political philosophy. Those were the areas that interested me most. And I applied all around, but the one place where I could pursue both graduate school and a legal education was New York, just in terms of the proximity of the schools. I wasn't able to get into UC Berkeley Law School, the Bolt School, I think it's called. So otherwise, I would have loved to stay there, perhaps. But I came to CUNY Graduate Center for philosophy, the PhD program in philosophy, and I went for a year at Fordham Law School. The first year is basically where they give students the greatest focus on what the actual law says in various fields: contracts, torts, criminal law, constitutional law, criminal procedure. And I wanted to be, again, it was important to me not only to be a good communicator, but to have something of value to communicate. And so I wanted to be one of those rare philosophers that aren't just philosophizing from their armchair, but actually knows something about the subject matter about which he is lecturing or writing. And so I wanted to know a lot about the law. I wanted to know about how lawyers reason. I wanted to know what the actual penal codes say if I was going to be writing something on criminal law. So I went to Fordham Law School for a year, and then I continued my graduate studies. And as I was doing that, I was teaching at community colleges, teaching here and there, sometimes as a teaching assistant, sometimes running a course. I was lecturing at private philosophy conferences during the summer that were usually continuing education opportunities for people perhaps that missed taking humanities when they were undergrads years before, or just very ambitious undergrads who wanted to do something in humanities. You know, perhaps their focus was science or engineering. So I would lecture at those conferences, and that gave me teaching experience. But it also gave me an experience of what academia is really like, where free speech, open debate is almost virtually shut down.
Right.
Where you have areas where you can speak freely, free speech zones, but otherwise you have individuals threatened both physically and verbally through menacing into self-censoring.
Right.
If the censors aren't successful at censoring them. And in some cases, they're threatened with suspension, expulsion, simply for exploring ideas or bringing speakers onto campus to speak that might explore ideas that are to the left-leaning university professorship challenge the orthodoxy. And so once I found that, once it got to the point where I saw that individuals, let's say, who there was one individual I invited that argued that modern African Americans accepting help from the federal government through the various entitlement programs were acting like house Negroes. Now, I don't, as I've told you before, I don't think I've agreed with anyone I've met 100%. And I certainly had issues with this.
Was this an author, a philosopher?
He was an author. I think he was a sociologist. I forget his name right now. And I forget what the name of his book even was. It was something about get off the plantation or something like that, something provocative. That caused a shitstorm. And it got to the point where his physical being was threatened. And that to me, that was the line that was crossed in the sense of going from a point where I could tolerate some of the peculiarities of living as an academic to saying like, no, this is bizarre. This is an inversion of what the academy is supposed to be. When the people who come in and test our most cherished beliefs have to leave for fear of being harmed bodily. And the university doesn't protect them. It protects the students that threaten them.
It's ridiculous. It's not even that you don't have the freedom to explore these ideas through discourse, but it is almost accepted to bring this to a physical level, to where people who are physically threatened. It's absolutely just ridiculous. When in my experience having these types of discussions, and we've been talking for years on so many of these topics, and I find that when I am speaking to somebody who is embedded in some sort of institutionalized environment in their day-to-day hustle and bustle, there is I remember a comedian once saying, you could always tell somebody's going to say something racist when before they say it, they look over both shoulders to see who's in the room, Right. So as funny as that is, it sort of covers these other topics where when I have somebody who's an entrepreneur, somebody who isn't sort of anchored, to the world of some sort of institution, we speak freely. We have these, great discourses like, very much like you and I do constantly. But when you're talking about somebody who is now part of that institution, whether it be academia, whether it be government positions, a lot of law enforcement officers I speak to, there's two different personas that I could have a talk with. It's the one that he and I could have on record in public, and the one that he and I have to have behind closed doors, maintaining a certain level of anonymity. Yeah, and I recall having a good friend of mine who was on the podcast before as a fireman, and I, as much as he didn't think it would happen, I basically told him, look, we're gonna make you anonymous, during this talk, because I know there are going to be things, even on a subconscious level, you're going to avoid saying, if your name is attached, to this conversation. And sure enough, looking back at the conversation he and I had, there are definitely things that he would not have said or acknowledged had, his name been attached to it. Yeah. So what you're describing is something that I would say is not any longer, I don't know if it was ever, but certainly not any longer if it were, limited to the world of academia. It is now sort of permeated into, the very fabric of society. We're not allowed to talk about things that offend people.
Oh, sure.
And it ends the conversation.
Yes. In corporate environments, you have so-called trigger words that can't be used. And these things are meticulously written up in order to enable a company to fire someone. Just in general society, in terms of the media, we have a lot of self-censorship going on in this country and in Great Britain and across Europe now with regard to how they discuss Islam. And how they discuss Muslims. as if the very idea that there may be a connection between what is written in the Quran and certain verses, particularly the ones that were written after Muhammad was exiled or pushed out to Medina, and the behavior that we see with radical fundamentalist jihadis, that in and of itself now can get shut down if Muslims find it offensive from the point of view of a criticism of their prophet or of their religion, or liberals find it offensive because it strikes them as it did Ben Affleck to be racist.
Right.
So, no one, unless they have tremendous strength of conviction and unless they feel like they have very little to lose by virtue of their profession, if they've been working at it for some time, is likely to stand up to someone saying, shut up, you are criticizing my religion, you're offending me. Shut up, you're a racist.
Right.
Most people back down and cower in the face of that kind of attack. And it's unfortunate. It's gotten to a point where we can't disinfect the bad ideas permeating through our culture anymore simply because we refuse to expose them to the disinfectant of better ideas, of good ideas, and of good reasoning.
Right.
And the academy went from the open tradition of Socrates and the Agora and Aristotle's Lyceum in ancient Greece to something which I absolutely do not recognize anymore.
Right. And it's funny. My own personal journey through my own personal philosophy was one that was admittedly left-leaning. As I grew up in New York City, my parents are hippies, so the whole notion of everybody should get along, diversity is a source of strength, and so many things that I took for granted that sort of managed to sort of slip behind probably the wall of my developed intellect, which you see, with religion and things like this, the things that, you learn early on before you've sort of created these filters, that allow you to, as an adult, qualify information before you internalize it. So many of these things slip past the security system, and as an adult, I had to go back and basically reevaluate everything that I believed, because I realized that so many of the personal philosophies that I tended to represent and espouse as an adult were all developed, with a very, sort of censored, by censored means and through these sources of information that were just inherently, sort of edited and filled with an agenda that I had no even acknowledgement of, when I was taking this information. And one of my biggest struggles as an adult now, and with the podcast, I run into this all the time. It's when I do enter these very, controversial topics, I can't even get people to have a conversation, and the conversation winds up being reduced to commenting on the conversation itself. Yes. We never actually get past that point where we're both ready to have a discussion and we could actually, juggle and sculpt, our positions on the information that's out there. We can't even have the conversation. Right. And so in a much more sort of non-academic way, my experience has mirrored that completely. When I do find, people like yourself that are the great combination of intellect, education, and open-mindedness, I would like to think there were times in our, in our history as a civilization, where it was commonplace to find. It was almost like, of course, you were all three of those things. But nowadays, they're an anomaly. You're an anomaly, in the world of academia, because those academics that I've spoken to over the years, the fact that they won't have these types of conversations out in the open, it's baffling to me, because it winds up reducing me to the conversation about the conversation. It's like, why won't you say this to anybody else? Why won't you say this out loud? Why do you continue? Oh, I got a mortgage, I got kids, and it's like, they got you. Right. They got you.
Absolutely. It becomes a golden cage you're in, and you get used to a certain lifestyle. You've made a tremendous investment. I mean, I spent 5 years at Berkeley. I spent many years in graduate school. I went to law school for a year. I spent a lot of money and a lot of time preparing to be an exemplary academic, an exemplary teacher, someone who is going to help my students and prompt my students to think for themselves. But I found that the environment in which I was going to do that was not only going to stifle me, it was going to continue to stifle whatever students came my way.
Right.
So it wasn't worth it to sort of go down a career path where I knew I was going to grow into one of these grumpy old men who just disenchanted with life. So I pursued a different career. I found a different avenue for my love of teaching, which is to teach exercise science and nutrition. But I still have all the skills that I acquired as a philosopher in my training, and this is something else that I guess set me apart within academia. I grew to have a healthy respect for Ayn Rand as a philosopher, as an intellectual, and that's something that unfortunately a lot of my former academic colleagues can't join me in. It's gotten to a point where they forget that Socrates and Aristotle and Plato and Plotinus and all these individuals from history's past, Descartes, they weren't professors of philosophy. They weren't part of university system. But oftentimes, because Rand was to them merely a novelist, a popularizer of ideas, even though she wrote many serious essays and spoke to very many serious philosophic issues. The fact that she didn't use their terminology, that she wasn't a fellow academic, that she wasn't from within the system, within the guild, garnered her a level of dismissal from them as being unserious. And so, there are a few exceptions. There are, as I mentioned, private think tanks and organizations that study her ideas. There's now a chapter of the American Philosophical Association called the Ayn Rand Society that does technical papers on her ideas. But she's still very much sort of not admired or respected within academic circles. And strangely, I mean, someone like Nietzsche was also was a professor of philology, of languages, but he wasn't a professor of philosophy, but he's a highly regarded philosopher. Wittgenstein didn't spend his life teaching philosophy.
Do you think it was because Ayn Rand was more contemporary, more sort of in touch with what was going on in the world of academic philosophy right then in the here and now? Do you think it was a legitimate critique of her capabilities, or do you think it was which we see in other aspects of academia, do you think it was a rejection because she was an outsider and therefore not under the influence of more traditional institutions or the institutionalized world of philosophy? What would you, if you had to?
Yeah, I think there's elements of both, because to some extent, academic philosophers have gotten used to the model that the way you carry on a conversation is by engaging each other through the journal system. And so you write an article and then you have other people respond to you, and you'll deliver talks at the American Philosophical Association, and you'll have someone who is a friendly critiquer and someone who tears you apart. And that's apparently how philosophic knowledge is supposed to be carried forward. She often didn't see any point in engaging philosophers using their lingo, using some of their technical terms for certain issues, because she thought in many cases that the debate was falsely drawn out.
She didn't want to use the translated version of the books.
Right.
She wanted them in their own language.
She wanted to approach a lot of these issues firsthand as a thinking individual, and not just from a philosophic lens.
Let me pause you there.
Sure.
So to now just conclude, you wound up with a philosophy degree. You
Yes.
PhD.
Almost. ABD.
ABD and in law.
Just the first year of law school.
So now you're in the world of academia. We've transitioned into the world of Ayn Rand. Give me Ayn Rand's philosophy, and I ask simply because I want you to give me what your simple answer to that question would be, understanding that in no way would it actually in any way address every aspect of who she is. But if you had to, because I would say there's a power and a skill involved in even being able to take a swing at this, give me in a sentence or two who Ayn Rand was and what her philosophy is.
Well, Ayn Rand was
Never mind who she was.
Oh, who she was. Okay.
I shouldn't have said that.
All right.
Meaning
her philosophy. Right. Okay. Well, what's very helpful is that she actually did a very good job in a little piece that she did called Introducing Objectivism, which is the title that she gave her philosophy, Objectivism. She happened to be at a publisher, and somebody in the audience said, "Could you summarize your philosophy while standing on one foot?" So she obliged. She stood on one foot and she said, metaphysics, objective reality, epistemology, reason, ethics, egoism, politics, capitalism. And then she went on to elaborate what she meant about those things. So metaphysics is that branch of philosophy that studies the nature of things, the fundamental nature of things. What kind of world do we live in? What kind of universe do we live in? Is it a universe of laws, or is it a universe of constant flux? Or is it a universe of miracles and of deities that fool around with our fates? Are we predestined to be how we are, or do we have free will? Those are some of the questions we ask in metaphysics. Epistemology is the study of how we know what we know, anything that we know or claim to know. Ethics is the study of what principles are best to guide human behavior. And politics is the application of those ethical principles, particularly to the issue of what principles are best for guiding human beings when they live together in society, when they're not living as solitary creatures, which none of us live that way. Aristotle said that only gods and beasts could live as solitary creatures. So for her, to say objective reality in metaphysics literally meant there is a world, there is a universe apart from us. And in order to bend it to our will, in order to maneuver your way through that universe, through that world, you need to understand it. You must first comprehend the principles of that world, and then you can command it. So it's nature to be tweaked, to be commanded, must first be obeyed. A principle I think that goes back to Bacon, to Francis Bacon. A popular way that she rephrased what she meant about objective reality is that wishing didn't make it so. So that there was this world apart from us, and that world, even our inner world, is impervious to change just because we wish it to be so, or because we fear the way it is, or because we hope that it would be something other than what it is. So wishing won't make it so is basically the popular way that she would restate that objectivism believes in an objective reality, an independent reality from the human perceiver. In epistemology, she would say that the way that you know anything ultimately is by applying your reason to that which you perceive. You think about the things, the experiences that you have, and ultimately that's what yields you, without contradiction, to having knowledge about the world around you or about yourself. And so reason to her is the primary guide for knowing anything about the world, knowing anything about ourselves. It's the primary guide to action. And in that regard, it's the one absolute that you can't deal without if you're going to survive as a human being. Unlike other animals who can manipulate symbols that behaviorists teach them, human beings are the only species that literally survive by use of their reason, by use of building concepts about the world around them, testing theories, testing principles. In ethics, I think she would say the right principle for guiding your life and for making the most of it is to see yourself as an end in itself. You see yourself and your personal happiness, your personal fulfillment in this world as being the end of your actions, the end that you seek. And that could take, of course, many forms, many different careers, many life paths. But the fact that you are not a means to the end of any other individual or any group, including government.
Well, she called it selfishness.
She called it selfishness, the virtue of selfishness.
So
she did that primarily to provoke people.
But I think it gets you to where you need to be in a hurry.
Yeah,
when you say the virtue of selfishness,
Yes.
how could selfishness be a virtue? Exactly.
Yes.
Let's think about that. You know, and that's, one of the things I admire about Ayn Rand is that she has no issues with, just speaking bluntly. Like, yes, I am not, here to help you.
Right.
I'm here to help me. There are certain applications where helping me does help you, and there's ways that we can create that synergy of, but selfishness is a virtue.
Yeah.
And which is a far cry from what a lot of other people would think.
Yeah.
Given what they know to be true up until speaking or being exposed to, somebody like Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
So
it's funny that you mention those situations where helping myself helps others, because that leads to her political philosophy, where she espoused laissez-faire capitalism, a complete unregulated capitalism, one where there is a complete separation of politics from economic activity, much like she believed there ought to be between politics and religion.
Crazy talk.
Yeah.
That's just crazy talk now, Francisco.
That's one of the chief reasons why she's disliked.
Who will build the roads?
Right. Who would create a pencil?
Right.
Presumably, right? A pencil is, this graphite surrounded by wood, and it has metal elements in it that hold the eraser in it. Mm-hmm. And so how do all these people pursuing their self-interest somehow coordinate to make this thing that has so much utility for so many human beings around the world? And yet they do. So in a sense, that was, I think, one of the things that's underlying the uniqueness of her political philosophy, her espousal of laissez-faire capitalism, this idea that the ideal way to interact with other people is to bring something to the table which is of value and to trade it with the other individual for something that you value.
Win-win.
So I give $1, I get a quart of milk, and we both say thank you because we've both benefited. That grocer values that dollar more than I value the quart of milk, and vice versa. So it was all about creating win-win situations, all of us rising together through our own individual efforts, but in a way where we respected each other as traders, not in a relationship of exploited and exploiter, not in a relationship that makes one subservient to another legally, morally, politically. So I think that is a beautiful vision. And unlike a lot of other alleged beautiful visions, like the vision of communism, where we're all our brother's keeper, it's actually one that can work and that is not dependent, I think, on utopian assumptions about human nature. Right. Because we tend, from the time that we're children, to want to pursue that which we're interested in.
Right.
And then that develops over time. And that interest now expands to include our friends and to include our communities. And all those things then become intricately involved in our self-interest. But nevertheless, it's, as children, we don't have to be told, pursue your bliss,
right.
Do what makes you happy, and treat other people with respect, treat them as people that are also pursuing what is making them happy, and trade with them through mutual respect, mutual benefit.
Right.
I think that's a lovely vision for how human beings can get along in a society and globally. That's the vision that I think could underwrite a true global brotherhood
right.
and sisterhood. Certainly not the kind of vision that I see with people who literally talk about everybody as their brother and their sister,
right.
Because they see them as brothers and sisters that I pull along,
right.
that I help along. You need my help, and therefore,
right.
I'm made to feel better about that.
There are some applications of that I want to explore before we do that. What did she think about men? What was her opinion? Because she's a woman. Mm-hmm. She was her whole life.
Very much so. Yes.
What was her opinion on the role of men? She had to be a feminist, right?
Well, she was a feminist, I would say, in, I guess you could say, either a very classical sense or a very recent sense, in the sense of she believed that men and women were every bit each other's equal morally, intellectually. They could both be capable of extraordinary courage and occasionally cowardice. They could both exhibit all the full array of human virtues and vices. But I think one of the things that is unique to her as a philosopher, well, I certainly see aspects of it in Nietzsche and to some extent in Aristotle as well. This idea of believing in and arguing for the pursuit of that which is best within us as human beings. And when she speaks of us as human beings, she's usually using the term men in a gender-neutral fashion. So she talks about finding the best within man. And she was very much someone who believed that there were heroes among us. There were those that we could aspire to be like, that we could admire, and that we should aspire to be heroic in our own lives. she called it hero worship. She called it man worship. In the way that she meant it, I don't think she was saying only men can be heroic. So she was using it in a gender-neutral fashion, much like I think you can go back and read "All men are created equal" in the Declaration of Independence to include women and to include men of different races. Now that we have a more enlightened understanding of what it means and how that term captures all. But she certainly had an exalted view of what human beings could be. For her, to say of someone, well, he's just human, I think would have rankled her, would have made her wince, simply because that expression seems to imply that being human means we're lower, means that we are prone to sin. All of us are sinners, and so who can cast the first stone? When she used the term man, when she used the term human being, she meant the best in us and the best among us. And it's that exalted sense of what human beings are capable of what man is capable of in himself and in his society, by virtue of his achievements, by virtue of his ability to think and conceive and manipulate the world to his goals, that I think most captured my fascination when I first read her as an adolescent. Because at that time, when you were young, you too have an exalted sense of what life is possible.
What possibilities are.
And what's possible to you as a man or as a woman. And that kind of exalted sense of what's possible hasn't been beaten out of you by adults who say that's silly or that's not practical. Or just by the general compromise that most people make.
That's not nice to say.
Yes, precisely. Yes. Yeah. Or who are you to say that, that would imply then that you're going to be better than other people.
Right.
And clearly there are human beings that walk among us that are better than other human beings as exemplars of their humanity.
You don't have to qualify it. You can just say that. It's okay.
Yeah,
but
better. Yeah.
and it's important that and I interrupt you because I want even the interruption to be acknowledged. That I think it is a farce that there are people walking around who espouse the equality amongst every individual on the earth, when there are clearly, by any means of assessing value, there are clearly people who are better than other people. And I'll qualify it now by saying whether it be productivity in society, whether it be contribution to the well-being and betterment of those around them, whether it be through scientific discovery or I'm born and raised in the Bronx. I will maybe I won't have to show you who's better than the average person, but I could certainly show you who's worse, and I could say, what is I could ask people, what is the value system that we could look at this particular individual and say that he's achieved any value, in any system of value that we may have. Show me the system where he's on par with us, and again, it's crazy talk, it's these uncomfortable conversations, and it's, it leads to a direction that I think forces too many people to sort of put their mouth to the fire hydrant, and they don't want it. They're not ready for everything that comes along with that conversation, because it shatters our I wouldn't say our view of the world. I would say our comfort level, with our view, So now getting back to those applications of so many things that she spoke about. Oh, but before we do that, what was the quote that she had? I paraphrase everything because my memory is absolutely horrendous.
Mine too.
Yeah, whatever. So she had a saying about somebody asked her if she would consider herself a feminist.
Yes. She was asked in one Q&A if what she thought of feminism. And this was, I think, in the early 70s. So it's, even though Betty Friedan wrote many years before, and the movement that we identify with feminism, with Catherine McKinnon and a lot of those thinkers came to bloom in the early 70s, late 60s. That's where you had the Equal Rights Amendment, right. Gloria Steinem, and you had feminism defined or redefined by them as in some way inimical to men, as being engaged necessarily in a war of the sexes, a war of the genders, and men portrayed as necessarily abusive of the rights and privileges of women. So in that context, where women aren't just saying, we're just as able, we're just as intelligent, we're just as capable of men, and we can compete with any man in any endeavor, politics, science, literature, in a context where these women were actually seeking redress from the government that would, by virtue of just government edict, reverse the laws of economics and make the average pay of every man equal to the average pay of every woman, that would make women equally representative with men in every board of directors of every corporation across the country. She said, in that context, with regard to feminism, I am a male chauvinist proudly. She did not believe that if women were every bit as equal as men in their intellectual capabilities, in their moral capacities, that they needed the federal or state governments to go to bat for them.
Crazy talk, Francisco. You're just talking crazy again.
Yeah.
So you mean to say if a person is equal, they should not receive any special treatment to sort of somehow bridge the gap of inequality? If you're equal, you don't need any disparity to be sort of provided for or eliminated by a third party because you're equal.
Indeed. What the have-nots, whether you define the have-nots as women coming out of an era of expectations about them that reduce them to just being housewives or purveyors of children to the world, or you're talking about people who are so-called economically disenfranchised. What the have-nots have not, according to her, is freedom. The freedom to excel, the freedom to go as far as their ambition and their individual ability and circumstances allow. You don't need government to give them a helping hand. You need government to get out of their way.
Get out of the way. Happens to be my philosophy as a homeschooler, as a homeschooling parent. Very much for the same reasons, different application maybe, but conceptually, when dealing with the progress and the sort of growth, the academic, intellectual growth of a child, get out of their way. Get out of their way. Don't have them think that you are the means by which they could achieve. You have nothing to do with it. Get out of their way. And, with my children, it's certainly, rung true. So now, Ayn Rand, she passed away.
1982.
82. I remember, and people can go on YouTube and look at her and watch her on the Phil Donahue show. Some of her best, one of the things I loved about Ayn Rand was that she had this confidence and she had this presence that you couldn't help but to admire. And when you look at everything that she would say about so many things in terms of, where men should be, in a relationship, and what the dynamic in a relationship between men and women should be, and how everybody. She had what would almost, and correct me if I'm wrong, empowering what other people would think is a sort of a sabotaged, or maybe not sabotaged the right word, empowering what so many other people would say has no power or is repressive by nature, but empowering the model of the dynamic between a man and his wife, and speaking to the strengths of what that relationship could be, without in any way denigrating or limiting the power of each individual, the man or the woman, and saying you could have a man and a wife and both of them be incredibly powerful, even though the dynamic between them represents, this on the surface very traditional model, but that it works. I loved hearing her, aside from her just quick wit, her just complete control of the rhetoric, the complete control of the conversation, and how she was such an intelligent woman. I always make the joke that I know when people are dumbing stuff down for me, and I always appreciate it what they do when they do, but even I get aggravated because when a lot of people, just like yourself, very intelligent person, in some of our conversations, I understand that you're speaking at a level that I could consume what you're saying, but I like to say that I'm at that uncomfortable level of intellect where I may not be able to deal with some of the ideas at the level that, like, let's say in philosophy, a person like yourself can operate, but I'm just smart enough to realize that you're dumbing it down for me. So with Ayn Rand, when you hear her talk, she was funny, I thought. She was very confident, but you saw that she had fun talking to people that she knew were her intellectual inferiors, and she made it an interesting conversation, but didn't make people feel stupid in the process, and that's one of the reasons I love listening to her speak. Because aside from, her having such interesting ideas that are based on so many concepts that I completely agree with, using logic and reason to come to conclusions, and having a consistency of the application of your personal reason and logic,
Right.
In different areas of your lives. She was just a great person to listen to. She was very entertaining.
Yes.
What were, aside from the sort of academic, sort of refusal to accept, her work, for the reasons that we had discussed earlier, what were the positions of some of her critics? Who like, what Ayn Rand gets it wrong. She's screwing it up. What was their arguments for being against her?
Oh, well, so if you're talking about, let's say, her critics from the left, people who, let's say, supported.
Is that where her critics came from?
They came from both the left, the right,
the middle.
I
think that's all we have left.
No, certainly the middle. I'll explain what I mean by that. In the sense of people who are middle of the road about everything. People will say, well, that's you can't be too black and white. You can't, it's that's too simplistic. Life isn't like that. Life requires a lot of and it's funny in the talk that she gave before, I mentioned where she was introducing objectivism while standing on one foot. She said a line that stays with me. She said, "Now I've just done this, but obviously my philosophy is a lot more complex than this, which is why you can't talk about or describe a philosophy while standing on one foot or while sitting on a fence, which is what most people do." And so, she did get criticism from the middle of people who think that It's simplistic to talk about certain things in the world as being good or evil. No, there's always attendant motivations, how someone was raised, nurture. And you have to look at all those complications to get, you can't go to war just thinking of one side as being good and one side as being evil. Each side has their motivations, and you have brave people on both sides. And so, in that sense, you have an equivalence of cultures. They just happen to disagree about something, and they couldn't handle it in the UN anymore. And so they happen to be shooting bullets at each other. Mm-hmm. But so she got criticism from those individuals, but also from the left, in the sense that she wasn't a supporter of the New Deal. She wasn't a supporter of all the various programs that intrusively tried to pick people up. She wanted to have people, she wanted the government to give people the freedom to pick themselves up, right, or to pick each other up in the communities of where they cared about each other and where they could actually see what's working and when somebody needed a helping hand and when somebody needed a foot in the butt. Right. So that was important to her. And so she didn't share this idea of, I am my brother's keeper, mm-hmm, and you must feel guilty about whatever you have or whatever you've worked for, whatever you've produced and earned, because after all, it's not you who built it. It's not you who really earned it. You use public roads like everybody else. So you have to share the responsibility for that thing which you made with everybody else in society. But besides that, the idea that we are our brother's keeper, this old altruistic ideal that we borrow from the ancient Abrahamic religions and even earlier codes, that the only way that we rise is by helping each other out. And that probably made sense for prehistoric man when we lived in small tribes, and where living as a hunter-gatherer was so precarious. But once we got to a point where somebody was able to train his fellow human beings how to use fire and harness it, how to have a wheel, how to raise crops in different climates, and you had growing groups of humanity that couldn't rely on each other directly, now you had, I think, a different incentive structure where you allow the best among us to carry us with their ability, and you give them the freedom to do so. Right. And you thank them. You thank them for, like, well, I recognize I'm not at the height of the pyramid of human ability, right, but thank you for allowing me to be in a society where I can benefit from the fact that you've created something to deal with viruses, where you've created an iPhone, where you've done things to make my life immeasurably better, right, both quality and longevity. So she had critics from the left who said, "Oh, that's inhumane. That's you're turning your back on what is truly ethical, which is to put the interests of others first before your own. And only in so doing are you acting ethically." So she definitely had disagreements with those, and with all the so-called do-gooders on the left, all those who feel they are so benighted by their wisdom that they learn.
Social justice warriors.
Absolutely. They're out there. They learn what needs to be done socially and economically in their economics classes, in their sociology classes, and they go in and they want to re-engineer society and re-engineer the human being with it. But she also had critics on the left. One of the on the right. She had Buckley. William F. Buckley was just starting out his National Review magazine at the time that Atlas Shrugged came out in 1957. And they didn't like the fact that she was an atheist.
Right.
They didn't like the fact that she was secular. They didn't like the fact that she didn't believe in imposed gender roles. If a woman wanted to be a homemaker and a childbearer and to have that be her domain, then so be it. Let her be the best mom and homemaker she can be. But it shouldn't be something imposed on them, again, by
And
government fiat.
I'm in complete agreement.
Yeah.
I remember when it came to Atlas Shrugged, I enjoyed the Fountainhead more because it was a much shorter book.
Yes.
It's
About
like
400 pages.
I have Atlas Shrugged right there on the
Yes, I saw it.
on in my library, and I have read it, and it was a work. It was for somebody like me, who I consider myself probably more motivated academically than accomplished. But I'm smart enough to surround myself with smart people. So I have positive, productive conversations. In Ayn Rand's work, in her work, you see, and obviously her vehicle for getting across so many of her ideas is in fiction, in these, in these novels where she creates these characters that illustrate so many concepts that she wants to convey to people, maybe as organically as possible. So she gives them, or she delivers them by way of attributes in some of her characters. She creates a sort of simplistic reality, and I'm speaking of Atlas Shrugged now, a simplistic reality, but simplistic only in its necessity to illustrate what she's trying to get across. What is the society, or what would Ayn Rand's opinion of today's society be? And obviously it's a loaded question. Obviously I make no bones about, the fact that I absolutely detest the welfare state and the mindset that has been really bred, as a result of it. And, the conversations that I have nowadays with the have-nots, really centers around just a disconnect of logic and reason. And, some of these people, they apply, even educated have-nots, they apply logic and reason to so many aspects of their life. But when it comes to, very similar to a lot of the conversations I have about religion with people, when it comes to that one thing, whether it be speaking to a black man about white privilege, whether it be speaking to a poor man about corporate America and how the man's holding me to this man that's holding all these people down. My whole thing is, well, in every other aspect of your life, you apply this rigor, this just very proactive, what we call feeder approach to overcoming, any sense of adversity. And that could be playing sports. It could be lifting weights. It could be fixing your car that broke down on the side of the road. But there's so many instances where we know sitting in a broken car on the side of the road, talking about how unfair it is when you see so many other cars working as they're driving past you, that doesn't get you back on the road. And, getting into the nuts and bolts of how we deal with society, or how you improve your position, your perceived position in society, how so much of it, I think it's so simple, because it's the side of the road analogy. It's, you fix your own car and you get on the road and you get to where you want to go. And that is not what I see in the consciousness of so many people in society now, which is why I love so much of Rand's work. It's because she speaks to that. She speaks to, what about you? What are you doing for you? Why are you worried about so many other things when you haven't even gotten you squared away yet? What do you think she would say about today's society? Would she agree with me? Would she have a different opinion? What do you think?
Well, I would say that she'd think that our society is in a better place than some of the societies that she was familiar with when she was alive. She grew up in the Soviet Union prior to the civil war there, the Bolshevik Revolution. She fled with her family to the Crimea and then had to go back. And she barely escaped intact from that society. It was going to kill her mentally, and as it did in the case of her family, kill her literally, potentially. In this case, it was a mixture of the pressure put on that society by in St. Petersburg, is the town she was from, the pressure put on that town by the siege of the Nazis during World War II, but also the day-to-day grind of having these utopian do-gooders try to get human beings to fit their mold of what a proper society ought to look like. So I don't think she would have survived the Soviet Union, and she saw the worst of humanity in that sense. People turning in their parents just to get more rations. Then when she comes here, she expects that we'll have looked at what's happening in the Soviet Union and want to avoid repeating their same mistakes. But then she goes on to see that we're heading more towards a socialized type of existence through the New Deal and through a kind of imperial presidency where the media and a lot of other individuals went along with a person who tried to stack the Supreme Court when he didn't get his way legally, who was voted into office 4 times. And then, of course, after that, in the aftermath of World War II, she sees the rise of adventurism all around the world in terms of conservatives leading us into one proxy war against the Soviet Union after another, whether it's in Africa or Nicaragua or Latin America. It then led to her seeing the riots, race riots and student riots in the 60s, the almost 20% interest rate in the 70s, price and wage controls brought on by Republican President Nixon, the complete abandonment of the gold standard, high inflation, people really suffering. So for her to see, I think, a society now where we have more by virtue of choice of what we hear in the media through podcasts like these, through more choice in cable news programs, blogs of all kinds of thoughts and flavors, to see that there are resurgent movements like my God, my mind is drawing blank. The Tea movement, the
Tea Party?
The Tea Party movement, yes, thank you. That are grassroots movements where people are standing up for themselves and saying, hey, we don't want to be pushed around. We don't want to be taxed out of existence. We want to have enough. We want to keep enough of what we earn to be able to pursue what we want to pursue with our lives, to build a second home, to send our kids to better schools. To see all this, I think she would say, well, it shows that human beings can step back from the abyss and realize their folly, and that the 21st century doesn't need to be a copy of the 20th century where we almost extinguished ourselves because of one experiment after another in collectivism. Right. So she would say that's better. But there's clearly certain things that she would find very dispiriting and problematic about our society. The rise of Islamism, for one, our paper tiger response to it, for another, what's become of academia and our self-censorship, both in academia and outside of academia, that we discussed earlier. These are all issues that she would find very disquieting. The rise of a surveillance state. She very much believed in the sovereignty of the individual, of his rights, his privacy, his right to be left alone. That old Robert Frost poem, "Good fences make good neighbors."
Right.
She felt that a society that was moving to greater levels of sophistication as far as civilization was a society in where we were virtually, we could deal with each other when we wanted to, but otherwise we were left alone to pursue our own interests in peace and in relative anonymity from each other. So, she would find a lot of those developments very disquieting. I'm afraid a give and take of pros and cons, as far as we've moved a few steps forward in certain areas, and in some other areas we've moved back. To a large extent, I have to give credit to her and to Atlas Shrugged. She wrote of Atlas Shrugged that it was a novel that she wrote in the hope that it would not become prophetic. And to a certain extent, she has had a profound influence on the right. And her ideas have been injected to society in such a way that it's changed the terms of debate, so that people aren't just simply talking about, there used to be just the Democrats and then the Me Too Republicans who would say, well, I don't think of us as being heartless. We care about humanity too, so okay, we'll go along with this entitlement program, but perhaps, just test it out or not have it be so far-reaching. Now there are fundamental debates going on the internet, in the media, about how far should government go in surveilling us, in taxing us, in controlling our behavior when it comes to eating, simply because it controls a large part of the medical bill in this country. So we're having real debates about this, if not in academia, at least amongst ourselves, amongst the dinner table, when you can have
amongst
the
intellectual free.
Yes, right.
Not academia.
Right.
The ones who actually have intellectual freedom.
That's right. Absolutely.
I like to say Atlas Shrugged was the prequel to 1984.
Yeah.
Right. So
I'd like to intercede with something. Something happened with my headphone, and I'm not hearing myself the way that I was before. I could hear my voice, and it was magnified through the headphones. Now I can hear myself talking, just simply because we're in a small room. But
well, I still hear you.
You still hear me. Okay.
Yeah, so maybe your tall ass kicked the wire down there.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know, but
Maybe.
I don't know what. We'll let it be.
Okay.
I think it will be all right.
All right.
So, what did Ayn Rand, and this will be the last thing that I want to touch on before we segue into more of a conclusion.
Okay.
But what did Ayn Rand have to say about charity?
First, that it was not a virtue. She considered virtues as those principled actions that you need to take in order to ensure that you will survive and thrive as a human being, that you will be happy in the course of your lifetime. And she felt that charity is not essential to life or happiness in the way that the other virtues she listed, things like rationality, independence, justice, pride, courage. These are things, honesty, these are things that human beings need in order to live their best lives, in order to be fulfilled in their lives as human beings. Whereas for her, charity was something that we have in order to address emergency situations. Where some among us, maybe because of an emergency, a storm like Sandy or Katrina, or some other reason, perhaps they just have neglectful parents, might need a helping hand.
To get back on track.
To get back on track. To get back on that path
Right.
towards happiness and personal fulfillment. And so she would say, you see someone who needs help, someone in your community, a neighbor, someone in your family, and you have it within you to be able to help them, if you care about them, if you're emotionally invested in their success, then by all means help them out. Even if it's just the general benevolence that you have toward strangers because they are your fellow human beings across the globe, that, you know, in Fukushima or wherever, then if you have the means, then by all means help them. Help them get back from that pit that they're in, that temporary situation, to a place where they can go back to striving again to thrive. But don't treat charity as if it were some kind of unconditional virtue,
Right.
as if all of life were a constant emergency or an ever-present sore that we have to tend to.
Right.
For her, that's one of the things we talked about, one of the things that set her apart from academics. There was somebody who approached me at Henzo Gracie's dojo the other day and said, you know, you're a philosopher. I studied philosophy as an undergrad. I particularly like the ethics courses where they were always talking about, like, well, what would you do if you were in a lifeboat? And, you know, would you kill some of your fellow lifeboat members if that's the only way you could survive? And Rand didn't play that. She did not play that game. She didn't think that you could judge how to live your best life and how to thrive by thinking about and spending a lot of time thinking about what you would do in a lifeboat situation.
Right.
She said, when emergencies come, when things happen in life that knocks you on your ass, you do what you can to deal with it,
Right.
and to surpass it and to move on. She certainly dealt with a lot of tragedy and a lot of hardship in her life, but I don't think she would say that the hardship and the tragedy somehow made for a better life.
Right.
She would say surpassing it, getting past it, made for a better life.
Right.
Made her more confident that she could
Right.
take on anything in life and get past it. And so sometimes people need a helping hand in regard to that, and charity is what that's for. It's not for just seeing the mass of humanity is
Right.
constantly needing your help, and how your purpose in life is to be the Mother Teresa to everyone's needs.
I like using I often use the metaphor of the walking baby to describe how we help people. And when you have a baby, and, you know, I'm going on my 4th child with my wife, when you see them right at the sort of precipice of being able to walk, at no point when you see them fall time after time after time, at no point do you ever say, oh, well, you know what, he's just not going to be a walker. You know, no matter how, because you know that it's unacceptable to sort of lower the standard of performance, you know, in that case. But a lot of times when we see people who are falling down in society over and over again, too often we say, you know what, he's just not going to be a walker. And I think it's an inconsistent approach when you're talking about truly having an interest in empowering those around you. If for no other reason than a selfish one of not having to take care of them later.
Yeah.
Or not having to deal with the mass of them later, you know, when they do outnumber you, you know. I pay a lot of tax money, Francisco. It's fucked up. It pisses me off, Francisco.
And the more you earn,
Pisses me off.
Yeah.
It's rough, you know. But let me tell you. Let me ask you.
Sure.
If one of my listeners never heard of Ayn Rand, or just, you know, in some trivial sense, maybe, you know, came across her name or her works, what would you say is the best way for them to really get a grip on the power that she had? What would they read? What would they watch? Somebody wants to maybe not, you know, get to a level of understanding anywhere near yours of her work, but they want to sort of take her stuff and put it in their pocket with everything else. What should they do?
Yeah. I think one of the best ideas when you're trying to evaluate a philosophy and you're trying to evaluate a thinker is always go to the source. nowadays they have more resources in terms of studying Ayn Rand than I had when I was a teenager. They have an Ayn Rand reader. There's a professor I know that I like very much wrote Ayn Rand for Beginners, and it had sort of a cartoon representation of Ayn Rand and her ideas. And I thought it was pretty well done. It wasn't dumbed down. But I think it's always important to go to the source, to go to the person whose ideas they are, and hear them speak, and read what they wrote. And so I would go to YouTube, and I would look for those Donahue performances. I would look for the other, she did other interviews with Ed Snyder and other people that were big interviewers, personalities at the time in the 70s. She had a way of not allowing somebody to define what she had to say and define the debate and accepting their terms that I thought was very instructive. She was very engaging. Her huge luminous eyes radiate intelligence, radiate engagement. And when you see that firsthand, I think it's hard not to be captivated by that. And then after that, I would say, turn to her novels. Allow yourself to just take a swim in the universe that she created in her novels.
Anthem, you gave me a copy of that. That was my first reading of any of her work.
Absolutely. It's a short work, it's a novelette about a futuristic society where collectivism has completely gotten hold of the human soul. And it's to me a scarier and truer picture of what that kind of future would be like than 1984 or Brave New World.
I see it right there on the...
So they could start with a small novel like that, and then maybe I would go to some of her introductory essays, like Philosophy, Who Needs It? I mean, I don't ever recall any professor of philosophy starting a 101 course with that question and saying, why the heck are all you students here?
Right.
Why are you paying good tuition money to listen to me talk about philosophy and talk about lifeboat ethics and all these things? She had the courage and the clarity as a thinker to answer the question, philosophy, why is it important? Why do we need it in our lives? Why is it not just the pastime of old white men from Greece or the pastime of the rich or people who have the capacity to think deeply about issues because they got nothing better else to do? She thought, no, everyone of every educational level, of every level of economic achievement and educational achievement should think more philosophically about things. Your life will be better for it. And that doesn't mean you have to do a formal study of every branch of philosophy, from metaphysics through politics. Just take some issue that is important to you. The inequality of pay between the genders, or
The alleged.
right, the alleged inequality. All right. It is alleged, and I would say that there is an inequality, but it's explained by things other than the sexism. But race issues, foreign policy, or just understanding what makes for a good relationship. Anything that is within your realm of interest. Try to see what Rand or other philosophers have thought about it and think about it more philosophically. And I think you'll come out the other end understanding the issues better and being better for it. Feeling more confident in dealing with those issues, feeling more confident in navigating those waters to the betterment of your happiness. So I would look to little essays like Philosophy, Who Needs It? She wrote a basic essay in ethics called The Virtue of Selfishness. She wrote another essay called Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, which is about her views in politics. Focus on those essays, brief novelette anthem, looking at the source on YouTube and seeing how she interacted with people and what her confidence literally allowed her to do as a thinker. And that would be a great introduction, I think, for anyone.
And I think that's an incredible and powerful assessment of what those interested in. And I think if you're a listener to this podcast, you've already signed off on so many ideas and concepts and philosophies and positions as it is. Although I'm sure and I know you've heard some of the podcasts here and there, but I have people that downright want to see me crucified in the middle of the town square. I have people who are ready to move with me to an island, to start a new society, and everything in between. But Ayn Rand is such an incredible source of power, and I second in my layman's way everything that you say in terms of what people could do to consume her work. Francisco, this has been an incredible conversation. I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to do it. I had a good time. I know, and you and I, we go grab lunch every now and again, and we always have great conversations. And I figured why not share some of these things with listeners. I hope you'd be open to coming back, in the future and talking about some other stuff. Whether you want to or not, I won't guilt you into it. So it's really just me being cordial by making it sound like you have a choice. But thank you very much. Any last words to the listeners?
To the viewership, I would say, there's no shortage of people today who are going to line up to try and tell you what you ought to think about Ayn Rand and about her philosophy, whether it's from the right or the left or the middle, or people who are even fans of Ayn Rand, people who are academic philosophers or just professional intellectuals who run seminars on her philosophy. They would like to package her for you and tell you what they think she said. Go to the source. Think for yourself. Listen to what she has to say. Read what she has to say. And then make up your own mind. There is no substitute for your own independent judgment. Don't put anybody else's reality above your own. That's it.
Great final talk. Thank you, brother.
Thank you for having me. This has been an honor.
100%. And we'll conclude there, and I will see you guys back with White Boy Pat sitting in that chair. Peace.
And we're back. Great talk. I told you guys, Francisco, super intelligent. I told you guys. It's kind of cool that, I didn't want to talk about it in the beginning of the interview, but Francisco's the first dude to kick my ass in MMA.
Which is awesome.
And he's this guy who, he's had like 10 fights.
Yeah.
He was like 8-2.
He's no joke.
MMA fighter. Like fighting when nobody was fighting.
Yeah.
Fighting when you had to you had to almost fight for your life when you fought because you had no idea who the hell was running the event, what the qualifications of the ref was. Just a hardcore dude, well-rounded Renaissance man, overeducated. I always bust his chops.
Yeah, he's sharp.
And just a great speaker. And you could tell he's somebody who went to school for it.
He did. He definitely went to school.
What was some of the favorite points of your of yours?
My favorite part was when he talked about how bad ideas are allowed to exist because of weakness, because they're not exposed. He used the word disinfectant. Like they're allowed to exist and are not exposed to disinfectant because people just are weak. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Another thing is his name. He shares it with a character from Highlander.
Does he?
Yeah, Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez.
Yeah, there you go. Pretty cool.
I just thought that. I didn't know his last name until recently, so it's pretty cool.
Very nice.
So
another great trivia, fact about Francisco and I is that we did, share a high school.
Yeah.
His old ass went there a lot earlier than I did.
Nice.
We both went to Bronx Science. He actually graduated from there. I was there for about a year and a half before my life brought me elsewhere.
True.
But smart dude, and
I'm a leaf on the wind.
yeah. And I look forward to bringing him back because he's a great person to sort of give an opinion, and being that he is a trained ethics philosopher, and just a lot of power to share, and I'm glad he made it in, and I'm certainly glad the podcast had the benefit of a talk with Francisco.
Yeah, he's definitely a good guy. We had some good talks before we started rolling.
Yeah, he's one of those very similar to Two on Tom.
Yeah.
He's one of those guys, as we're talking, it's like, I don't want to be rude, but I want to shut up. Let me start recording first, because what you're saying is too awesome.
It's true.
But he's one of these guys, just like Two on Tom, that they could be awesome on command. So they don't run out of awesome.
They don't shut the awesome off. It's always on.
Yeah, so pretty cool.
Yeah, awesome.
But Francisco, if you're watching, I appreciate you taking the time. So we're going to move on to our mantelpiece. I only found it fitting is Atlas Shrugged. During the interview, I alluded to that this was on the shelf, and here it is. I've managed to get through this once, and after getting through this, I saw the movies, and it showed me how much I should probably go through it again.
That's funny.
This is a sort of rite of passage, I think, for strong-minded thinkers.
I agree.
I do not agree with everything of Ayn Rand's philosophy, but I will say hers is a philosophy of strength. She's a champion of the individual, and when you do have so many groups looking to sort of feed, leech, loot off of others, hers is a very welcome position and philosophy.
I agree, 100%.
So, if you do have an interest, I mean, there are people, if you've ever been serious about philosophy, you've probably tackled Atlas Shrugged before. Those of you that haven't, I would suggest that you buy the book. And I will even go so far as to say, let's be realistic, buy the damn Cliff Notes if you want.
Yeah, why not?
Buy the movie. There's so much power to be had there. If you really just want, the juice of the story, I am not an Ayn Rand scholar. I'm not a part of any foundation that really, champions her work. So I could tell you, hey, read the Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
Just get the good stuff out. And
the movies are good.
The movies, you know what? If yours is a philosophy that is in any way congruent with hers, you will watch the 3 movies, nodding your head and giving these big body movements, agreeing with the characters, and But if you're not, you'll find it to be a somewhat disconnected, plot and storyline that really makes a couple of jumps.
Sure, it does.
It's a little distracting when all the actors are different every movie.
Every movie,
it's like, wait a minute, so who's this guy again?
I still got to watch the third one, because. But like it is. I remember watching the second one. I was like, "Yo, these are all different people."
Yeah, it's and I don't know if that was by design. I didn't do any background.
They said it was. It was on purpose.
Yeah, so
that was the plan from the beginning. They were going to make 3 movies and change the actors every movie.
So there you go. Yeah. But it wound up being a strong piece, and when you talk about a book that is as exhaustive as this one, putting it into 3 movies even is a challenge, and I think they did a very impressive job.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that people check that out also. Maybe, even in lieu of the book, if you're not going to read the book. But let's get to our Pressure Player and Unicorn.
Okay.
We decided to go a little bit of a different direction with this episode's, Pressure Player and Unicorn. We decided to pick characters out of Ayn Rand's books. And there are so many we could have picked for each.
Yeah.
After some discussion, not wanting to go completely down a expected boring line.
Yeah.
We decided to do characters at least from different books.
Yes, correct.
And the Pressure Player, we have Howard Rourke.
Howard Rourke, yeah.
From The Fountainhead. Now, Howard Rourke in The Fountainhead is an architect, and he's trying to explain how, what he does and the work that he does is something that is very personal, and he does not owe anybody else his work, and he's being pressured by, I guess, the architectural community to create architecture a certain way, following,
Correct.
Like old school traditional methods.
Yeah, like what is popular.
Right. And he doesn't subscribe to the sort of conformity
Yeah.
of that mindset. And the book is a great sort of platform for RAND to use these characters, specifically Howard Rourke, to expound upon all of the ideas that make, her objectivism so powerful. And I'm going to read a quote from Howard Rourke in The Fountainhead. Men have been taught that the highest virtue is not to achieve, but to give. Yet one cannot give that which has not been created. Creation comes before distribution, or there will be nothing to distribute. The need of the creator comes before the need of any possible beneficiary. Yet we are taught to admire the second-hander who dispenses gifts he has not produced above the man who made the gifts possible. We praise an act of charity, we shrug at an act of achievement.
Yeah.
And so true, so powerful.
Yeah.
And there you go. There's a reason to read The Fountainhead.
Yeah,
A hell of a lot
Fountainhead.
shorter than Atlas Shrugged, too.
Yeah, that's my favorite character. Any Ayn Rand character is Howard
Yeah.
Rourke.
Howard Rourke is the truth.
Yeah, and he committed 100% when they changed his building.
Yes.
Blew it up.
Yes.
That was...
Spoiler alert. There's some things I'm trying to leave out. Yeah, all right. So there you go.
So, that's it. Listen, though, but you don't know what happens. Does he go to jail? What
Oh,
happens?
man. I don't know. What happens? That could be so interesting.
happens?
After the guy blows up a building.
Well, you'd be surprised. Read it and find out.
He saw the dead people because he was dead.
I don't even know what movie you're talking about.
Anyway.
Next. It's a good book. My favorite.
Every party has a pooper.
Yeah.
So, Unicorn. James Taggart
Yes.
of Atlas Shrugged. He's in here somewhere.
He's in there a lot.
Now, James Taggart is the brother of Dagny Taggart. Dagny Taggart being the protagonist the same way Howard Rourke was during The Fountainhead. And Dagny Taggart is probably, Rand's way of creating a female Howard Rourke, basically representing all of, the same attributes and philosophies, but now putting it in, the identity of a female character, which is powerful in and of itself because it does sort of negate the gender dynamic in the philosophies that she's trying to share. So James Taggart is the president of Taggart Transcontinental Railroad, and he is basically a weak, I would say, nihilist. He's somebody that doesn't really empathize with others, but he does play to the relationships that he's managed to cultivate to an extent that he would put his relationships and the growth and maintenance of these relationships above the responsibilities of his task, his position, his obligation as president of the railroad, and his sister, who we almost made the pressure player, but we wanted to use different books. His sister is the exact opposite of that. His sister is very pragmatic. She's very capable. She's very proud. And she understands that she has an obligation to do the best job she can do in whatever job that she's doing. James Taggart is corrupt. He is along for the ride to the very end of the book.
Yep.
And he suffers a breakdown, a mental breakdown, because he witnesses something, and
I'm not saying nothing.
thank goodness
He witnesses things.
And but he's just an overall weak minded leech on
Yes.
On those those who produce around him. So you have the sort of makers and the takers. James Taggart is a taker.
Yes, he is.
And one of the narratives that goes along the entire storyline of Atlas Shrugged is this: we need to help the less fortunate. We need to provide for people that don't have it. And what's wrong with you? Why are you so selfish? Why are you and James Taggart is somebody who champions it, but obviously, and we know this to be the case when it comes to politicians nowadays. They champion whatever message is going to put themselves in a better position.
Correct.
The betterment of who they are, their legacy, the people around them, totally notwithstanding, and really, they don't give a shit.
No, they don't.
And often these characters will tear down everything around them.
They will,
because they have this sort of synthetic reality that is built and provided for by the very people that they're looking to undermine and sabotage.
Exactly.
So we're going to have a quote from James Taggart, and this is him talking to his sister. Dagny, I want to be president of the railroad. I want it. Why can't I have my wishes as you have always had yours? Why shouldn't I be given the fulfillment of my desires as you always fulfill any desire of your own? Don't I have a right to demand any form of happiness I choose? Isn't that a debt which you owe me? Am I not your brother? So with this quote, Ayn Rand touches on the whole, I'm my brother's keeper.
Yes.
She very purposefully puts in, am I not your brother, to show that this is the logic behind that concept. This demanding, just because of, who you are in relation to somebody else, and absolutely absolving you of any accountability, and need to actually participate.
Yeah.
When he asks her, don't I have the right to demand any form of happiness I choose? Well, you'll see this in the weaker components of our society today. They're miserable for reasons that may or may not be their own doing.
True.
And this is worth pointing out. You could be somebody who is in a less than favorable position, and there's nobody to blame.
Yeah.
But the fact remains, if we're going to continue to grow and increase our power as a society, we cannot allow people in dire situations to sort of get off the hook when it comes to things like accountability and the need to be creative and the need to be productive. If you don't give into the group, you do not deserve to take out of the group. How much you have to give is almost a secondary prerequisite to the very fact that you are giving, and giving is something that is in line and congruent with who you are as an individual. So, long talk with Francisco.
Yeah.
We were debating, actually splitting this into 2 episodes. I figured, you know what, and you agreed. I mean, you really suggested it. I agreed with you. It's like, you know what, let's just let it run. It's smooth. It's a great conversation.
Yeah. It goes, but it flies by because there's a lot of good content.
It does.
Yeah.
And I had a very good time talking to Francisco, as I always do, and I'm so glad I finally got to get it on the podcast.
Yeah.
Break it down, cracker.
So, Power of Ayn Rand. If you have, let's say you haven't heard of her work, now you have, so check it out. I would start with The Fountainhead and then read Atlas Shrugged. That's the order it was in, so I would do it that way. You could see it kind of develop between the 2 novels, and a lot of powerful stuff. The interview, listen to the whole thing. If you've already have, that's great. If you fast forward, rewind, listen to it again. A lot of powerful stuff, and I think that if you're looking for books that show strong characters, but not only that, one of the things, the best thing about The Fountainhead for me was that it shows the weak character. It has the guy who doesn't know what's going on. It has the person who knows what's going on but uses it to his advantage. And it really shows how people can twist things around and take powerful things and use them for poor and just bad choices. So I would say check both these books out, and you won't regret it.
Very good point about the different types of characters, the different players in the game. And I agree. With Ayn Rand, it's further proof that it's not about man or woman. It's not about black or white. I would even argue it's not about rich or poor. It's about accountability. It's about, are you somebody who understands that he has a role to play? Or are you somebody who thinks your very existence demands, rightfully, the resources and efforts of others? Ayn Rand is as strong a person as you're going to find. The fact that she is a woman adds, I would say, a layer of value on top of that, because it does sort of disarm any notion that a woman cannot be strong. I got Francisco to expound upon somewhat what her opinions were of feminism, her opinions of relationships between men and women, and with Ayn Rand, like I said, and it's almost I shouldn't even have to say it. It's something of a qualifier, but I still find it appropriate. I don't have to agree with everything she says. Maybe, because somebody will ask, maybe her thoughts on, what a tribe is, and maybe my understanding of what she considers to be a tribe is limited, But there is so much that I do agree on with her, that I put her on on a very short list of powerful people you should be listening to. Francisco said it. You don't have to read the books right away. Go to YouTube. Watch her talk. She's contemporary enough. She was on Donahue, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Go listen to her interviews. Hear how sharp she is. Hear the command that she has of the power that she shares, and how seamlessly, she gets it across whenever she speaks on it. She's a truly impressive woman, and I'm glad we got Francisco to talk about her. Thank you, folks, for listening to this episode. I had a great time doing it. It was a long time in the making, and we finally got to pull the trigger. We appreciate you guys spending the time with us. We know you guys are busy, and we know that we can't do this alone. So thank you for that. ThePressureProject.com is our website. info@ThePressureProject.com is our contact email. YouTube.com/The Pressure Project is our YouTube channel. Please subscribe. Remember, those of you that are signed up on the newsletter on the site, you get the link early for the video. You get announcements that other people don't get. So it's worth signing up to that newsletter at thepressureproject.com. Also, in the descriptions of all the videos, there is another link there that you could sign up to our newsletter. Do that and stay in the loop. We appreciate you guys, and we certainly enjoy doing what we're doing. We'll talk to you on the next episode. And as always, brothers, pressure to power.